By the time the fisherman finds me, I will have been dead for 33 hours, 6 minutes, and 29 seconds. 18 hours since the police declared me missing. 15 hours since Zoe told my biology teacher that my tent was empty and that I hadn't returned from the party that we snuck out to. Carefully and quietly, every twig a possible snitch. It was exhilarating. Oh, our hearts were pounding, and the smell of pine and seaweed thick in the air, and the moon a perfectly curved sickle. Zoe held my sweaty hand and didn't let go until we passed the tents and joined the others by the lake. The music on someone's phone was turned way down low, but I could still make out that it was Billie Eilish. Now, one of the guys, he offered us a beer. It was kept cold in the pitch-black lurking water. I remember thinking that I couldn't tell where the lake ended and the forest began. The first article published by the local newspaper read, "Promising high school student missing after a night swim in a lake." Shortly after, the water rescue service and the fire brigade took over the search. Dogs combed the area, their noses trailing through the damp earth. A human chain forms, people moving slowly through the woods, eyes scanning for any sign of me. Even a helicopter hovers overhead, its whirling blades slicing through the heavy charged air. The search drags on for hours, stretching into the twilight, and yet the woods, they remain silent. The police began to ask questions. When was she last seen? What was she wearing? Had she been drinking? Did she seem out of character? Angry? Sad? Suicidal? No, and no. She was singing. She was dancing. She seemed happy. When the fisherman finds my body miles away from where I was last seen, certainty sets in. The autopsy reveals that a hematoma was on my head and purple spots behind my ears. The coroners, they examine the water in my lungs and they confirm that I wasn't dead before entering the water. I died drowning. My classmates were questioned again. Zoe claims to have left early while I stayed behind with her twin brother, Tom, who has been the love of my life. Well, in his mind anyway, since middle school. Tom's behavior strikes the police as odd. He insists he barely spoke to me, despite people seeing us leave the party together for a few minutes. When my body is examined, traces of Tom's skin was found on my clothing, trapped between the fabric layers. Still, Tom sticks to his story, perhaps because the truth would embarrass him for some reason. Or maybe he's just afraid of all the questions that would follow, the scrutiny that might come with them. Tom is right, in the broadest sense. We really only exchanged 3 or 4 sentences that night, but only because Tom's mouth was otherwise occupied with me. I enjoyed every second of it, and looking back, I wished I had given him a real chance. But I was too worried about what other people might think, so, as usual, I brushed him off, leaving him to walk away from the party feeling all hurt. Cassandra insists that she heard Zoe and me arguing that night, just before Zoe headed back to the campsite. According to her, we were fighting over Tom, of course. She would say that What else would two girls argue about if not a boy? Cassandra even claims that Zoe pushed me, though Zoe denies it vehemently. She denies discussing Tom at all, insisting it was all about something else, something that wouldn't come to light until much later, when our biology teacher became a suspect. But Cassandra holds firm to her version of the story. The thing about Cassandra is that she's always been a shadow, the kind of girl whose name teachers forget after 2 weeks of spring break. Kelly? Cindy? Carrie? Something with a C. Right? So when she finally gets the chance to talk to the police and be part of the investigation, why, she really jumps in it. Unfortunately, Cassandra isn't much help to the investigators. She leaves the party at 2 a.m., just 40 minutes before I die, leaving me all alone with a group of guys who've brought along some tranquilizers. Sitting next to them felt like being stuck in a fever dream where I don't know, I can't even guess, somebody trying to explain quantum physics at a frat party full of drunk people. Well, at some point, I decided it was time to head back, but one of the guys casually asked if I needed someone to walk with, and I said yes, but no one moved. I glanced back, the campsite faintly visible through the cold, white light filtering through the pines. It was only a few meters away, just beyond the trees. I had walked this path for days, never once feeling threatened by shadows in the bushes. But tonight, that sinking feeling in my stomach just wouldn't go away. Still, I refused to be that girl, the one who got scared at every creak in the dark, the one who needed someone to hold her hand for a few steps. So I stood up, and I said I'd walk alone. And instead of sticking to the dark trail, though, I decided to take a small detour along the riverbank, a bit of a longer, bit of a lighter, and hopefully a bit of a safer trip. Now, one of the guys told me to text him when I made it to my tent, but when I didn't, well, no one even noticed. 16 days after my death, suspicion begins to shift towards our biology teacher, Devin. One of my classmates reveals that he had felt ill that night, and he went looking for the teacher's tent, only to find that it was empty. No teacher. And soon after, the teacher's behavior takes a strange turn. He starts making inconsistent statements that, well, they don't add up. Now, one day, he calls Zoe into his office after class, where he insists that his earlier proposal to her before the trip had been nothing but a joke. Oh, she understood that, right? It was sarcasm, he says, claiming that he really meant that if she wanted to improve her grades, that she should consider attending a tutoring service. And this is where Cassandra steps in for the final time. She confesses that she visited our biology teacher after the party, and they went to the boathouse, where, according to her, nothing bad happened, and he was just there for her. The biology teacher is immediately suspended, but the case against him has nothing to do with mine, as Cassandra's alibi clears him. Meanwhile, the suspicion surrounding Zoe and Tom are just too weak to pursue. My case remains unsolved, and eventually people began to accept the idea that it was just a tragic accident and that I must have just hit my head when I jumped into the water. They agreed that I seemed unhappy, not just that night, but in general, and that my relationship with my parents, who expected me to excel at everything, was strained. Perhaps it was the pressure that had finally gotten to me. It's all unsatisfying, of course. Unsatisfying for the local magazine, whose updates eventually dry up. And it's unsatisfying for the police, left with yet another unsolved case on their desk. And unsatisfying for my parents, who decades later will say in an interview that not a single day goes by that they don't think of their little girl. Maybe one day a classmate will write a college essay about my case, reflecting on how it taught them that life will end in an instant, and maybe my story will end up on a true crime podcast. Or perhaps Netflix will stretch it into a tightly structured 8-episode miniseries where my body is discovered just 3 minutes in. Enough time for the viewers to decide if they want to keep watching or not. Maybe none of this happens, and I'll just fade away like countless other women who are silenced every day simply for being born the wrong sex. It doesn't matter who profits from my story. It doesn't even matter if they eventually find the 2 men I crossed paths with on my way back to the campsite. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. None of that really matters. It doesn't matter because in the end, I'm just another dead girl underwater.